Hello, welcome to Chapter 2, Homework Questions 19 through 24. Question 19. What shape will the graph of y equals x squared plus 2 be? How can you tell? Justify your prediction by making a table and a graph on graph paper. So the first thing we might notice about this is it's y equals x squared plus 2, and when we graphed these in the past, they are parabolas or U-shaped graphs. So that has to do with when you take a quantity and square it. So to kind of prove that, let's go ahead and graph it. I don't mind if you go ahead and use Desmos or a graphing calculator to help you out here. The values that I'm going to go ahead and plug in are -3 all the way up to +3. And if I square -3 and I get 9 and I add 2, I get 11. And I'm going to do this kind of quickly, but we're just plugging the x value in, squaring it, and adding 2. So this would be 4 plus 2 is 6, 1 plus 2 is 3, 0 plus 2. And then what you'll start to notice is that the values start to repeat, the y values. And that's because when you square -3 or 3, you get +9 either way. And when you add 2, you get 11. So you'll see that symmetry occur in the outputs. And so if we graph most of these, -2, 6, -1, 3, 0, 2, and then work our way back through here. And even though 3 and -3 don't necessarily fit with the 11, kind of place them where they normally would be, and you'll notice that we get a nice curve, and once again that is the parabola. So let's write that down since that's what it asks. That's kind of what we thought because of the x squared, and it is, and we justified that by using a table and potentially a graphing calculator to be able to graph it. Question 20, evaluate each of the expressions given the information. So we'll start with A. We have 1 minus 2 times x, which is -2, plus 3 times y being -5. Now this is 1 minus, and I'm going to do a little bit of highlighting here. This right here is 1 minus 2 times -2. So we are multiplying a -2 times a -2, which is a +4. And then 3 times -5 is a -15. Make sure when you add left to right. So that is 5 minus 15, which is -10. On part B, it's negative or opposite of the absolute value of x. So that's -2 minus -5. We have to evaluate the entire inside of the absolute value. So -2 minus a -5, that's +5. So that would be the absolute value of 3. And then the absolute value of 3 is 3. And since the opposite of the absolute value is there, that needs to include the opposite at the end. So it is -3 at the end. On C, we have some square and cube roots. It looks like the first one's the square root of x squared, so -2 squared, plus the cube root of y, which is -5 cubed. Now, we might notice something on this one because we are taking the square root of something squared and the cube root of something cubed, and they do undo each other. So technically, you could say that, the square root of that squared. But when we square a negative, the problem here is a little bit is that when you square a -2, you get a +4. So the output is a +2. Plus the cube root. Now, -5 times itself 3 times is -125. And so when you do take the cube root of that, that does give you -5 back. So therefore, 2 plus -5 is -3. And that's supposed to represent a 3. And then I'll put D up here. And then on D, we have 1/2 times x, or times -2, plus 1/3 times y. So half of -2 is -1, a third of -5. Now -5 you could look at as -5 over 1. So that would be, if you multiply straight across, -5 thirds. So -1 plus -5 thirds, or -1 2/3, would be -2 2/3. Question 21, create a tile pattern that matches the table below. Be creative and make your pattern interesting. So really this one is up to you in terms of how you want to do this. There's lots of different ways. The big key on this one is that the x represents the figure number. So when you create your figure 0, you have to have 2 tiles. Now, where you place those 2 tiles, if you want them to look like this, that's fine. If you want them to be on top of each other, that's fine. You got lots of possibilities. But when you go to the next one, you have to add 3. So every new figure, you're adding 3 tiles. So however you want to add those 3 tiles is completely up to you. Like it says, be creative and make your pattern interesting. Question 22, figure 2 of a tile pattern is shown at the right. If the pattern grows linearly and if figure 5 has 15 tiles, then find a rule for the pattern. So we're going to set maybe a table up to get an idea of what we have here. X represents, remember, the figure number, and Y represents the number of tiles. And so by setting up a table, it gives us an idea. We don't know what figure 0, 1 is, but we do know figure 2 is at the right here, so you can see that you have a total of 6 tiles. We also know that it grows linearly, and we also have figure 5 at 15 tiles. So how are we going to kind of work our way through this? What is the growth as we go through? Well, you're looking to add some value, and I'm just going to call it X, each time. So if you take 6 plus a number, plus a number, plus a number again, we should get 15. And you might be able to figure that out in your head. You know, do I add 2 every time? Do I add 3 every time? What's that going to look like? The other idea is if I take 6 and I add X, that should give me the next one. I'm going to take that number and add X, get, what is that, figure 4, and then add X again to get figure 5. So that would be 3X. If I subtract the 6, that's 9. X is equal to 3. Now, if that didn't make any sense, that's perfectly fine. Just showing you another way that you could possibly look at it to be able to figure out, you know, what we're adding. So if I found out that X is 3, then we found what that constant growth is. So if we add 3, we get to 9. If we add 3 again, we get to 12. If we add 3 again, we get to 15. And then that same idea, we can work backwards. If we subtract 3, we'll get to 3. And if we subtract 3 again, we'll get to 0. So what we found out is that the initial is at 0, and then the growth is 3. That gives us enough information to write the equation. Y is equal to 3x plus the initial is 0. You don't need the 0, but just to show you where both numbers come from. Question 23. Find the output for the relation with the given input. If there is no possible output for the given input, explain why not. So on this one we have x is equal to 1, so wherever there's an x, so we're going to replace all these x's with 1s. And so the question we're trying to answer is what is f of 1? When x is 1, it's 1 divided by 1 minus 1, or 1 divided by 0. And there's two things. What is 1 divided by 0 and what is 0 divided by 1? And sometimes we get these confused. 1 divided by 0 is saying I have something, I'm giving it to nobody, which is a problem if you're dividing because you're trying to divide it amongst people or amongst things. Well, 0, if I have nothing and I want to give it to somebody, then everyone gets a whole lot of nothing, but it does work. Whereas this one is undefined. You can't take something and give it to nobody. Then it's just kind of stuck in your possession, but you're trying to divide it. So on this one, we cannot take 1 divided by 0, so therefore there is no value or there is no output on this one because you cannot divide by 0. And so once again, make sure you're always answering the question and explain it. Question 24. Find the slope of the line shown on the graph below. So we're looking for the slope, the change of y over the change of x. And I'm just picking the 2 points that are on the graph just to make sure that I am picking points that are on the line and not kind of eyeballing it. So it looks like, and be aware of how much it grows. So each one of these marks here represents 1. And so it's actually going 1, 2, 3, 4. And then now it's going on the other way because remember every block represents 2. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So your slope is equal to 4 over 12, which can be reduced to 1/3.